I can't feel my lower half. I can't feel it. What on earth is happening? And immediately it goes Titanic. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Elizabeth, also known as Nurse Zabe, here on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and I am a labor and delivery nurse, postpartum nurse, certified childbirth educator, and mom to 3. Today I am coming at you guys with a video that has definitely been inspired by just recent births that I have had the privilege of attending, where super normal things are happening that are either like bodily sensations, bodily function type of deals, and people are scared and freaking out and don't know that this is normal and expected. So this video is to hopefully give you some insight on these weird sensations and experiences that you might have happened to you during labor, and to help encourage you that they are normal and expected. Now, of course, if something's happening and stressing you out, always double check with your healthcare provider, but in general, these things, we see them often in labors, and I will give you some tips and tricks on how we can make them better or avoid them potentially, but some of these things are just like part of having a baby. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So for this video, how I'm going to function all of these different bodily sensations is basically break them down as to where they might happen in labor for you. And one thing that we can see in early labor, when labor is first ramping up, when maybe you're starting to notice some contractions, or even in the days leading up to labor, is looser stools and diarrhea. Yeah. Not super fun necessarily, but it has a reason. So prostaglandins are what kind of start our early laboring process. They help to thin out the cervix to get it ready for dilation with those contractions and with the oxytocin. And prostaglandin and oxytocin are two labor hormones that actually work in a positive feedback loop. So the more your baby's head is on the cervix and thinning it out, the more prostaglandins, the more oxytocin you have, the more contractions you have. So we love this positive feedback loop. But prostaglandins are also what's responsible for our period cramps when we have our period, and also responsible for just increased motility of our gut, our lower GI tract when we have our period. Maybe you've had some smushy, fun period poops. This is kind of the same thing, but in labor. So if you're having some looser stools at the beginning of your labor, please know that that is normal. And also know that maybe that's going to be helpful later on. A lot of us are worried about having a bowel movement when we have our babies. And while we still might do so, you're going to be mostly cleaned out. The other thing that has to do with our GI tract as well is nausea and vomiting. A lot of people don't know that it can be super common and normal to have nausea and maybe even vomiting during your laboring process. This is because our gut is slowed down. All of our energy is going to our uterus. All of our blood flow is going to our uterus. We also are going to have our babies pressing on our lower GI tract, kind of blocking things off from that aspect. And that, coupled with the weight of the pregnancy, maybe some acid reflux type situation, you may throw up. You're probably going to feel nauseous at some point. You may throw up. The other thing that can definitely lead to nausea and vomiting is a quick drop in your blood pressure, which sometimes happens after the epidural is placed. And we will combat that with medications, with fluids, but that definitely can make you feel nauseous and make you throw up as well. So there are some things that perhaps we can do that might help with the nausea, although sometimes the best thing that's going to help is actually just to throw up, and then you feel like a million times better. I definitely threw up either when I was pushing with my first or immediately upon delivery, and then went on like 10 minutes later to eat Chick-fil-A because I just needed to get what was in my tummy out, and I felt so much better. Things that might help: small sips of water, ice chips, but not chugging down a whole bunch in one sitting. Opening up a little alcohol swab and actually smelling it can help. And you might also find that smelling peppermint oil to be helpful. You also can get some Zofran in your IV, which is like an IV antiemetic or anti-nausea medicine. Cold washcloth on the back of your neck and your forehead if you are experiencing nausea, especially if that's in that transition period. So those are all things that can help with nausea, but nausea and vomiting can be a really common normal part of labor. So what we're gonna do is have our little emesis bags ready to go, set up all around the room. We're gonna give you one, we're gonna put one on the bed, we're gonna give one to your partner, so if it does happen, we are prepared. Here's one that I think when people see, they absolutely freak out, and I have to tell them how normal this is. And this is a little bit of vaginal bleeding and or bloody show, which is bleeding mixed with mucus. So our cervix is incredibly vascular, and it's thinning out and going back behind our baby's head. And so the blood vessels that are in our cervix are getting disrupted. So it's super, super common and actually a great sign of labor progression if we're seeing a little bit of bleeding. Don't be surprised too if after a cervical exam, when your provider pulls out their hand, they might have some blood and some mucus on their fingers, again, because they are feeling that cervix and getting a little bit on their fingers. What we are going to be worried about is too much bleeding, especially if that's accompanied by pain, a hard, rigid abdomen. That can be signs of something called a placental abruption. But a little bit of bleeding in labor is normal, especially if that bleeding is mixed with mucus or mixed with our cervix changing and dilating. Another thing that, while I will say can be common in labor, is often a sign that we are needing to help baby find a better position, and people often are not prepared for this. And this is coupling and tripling of contractions. And what I mean by that is you have a contraction that is going to build up to the peak, it's going to start to come down, and then it's not going to fully come down before causing another contraction, another wave, another peak, before maybe coming down, or maybe there's even a third one associated with it. For the most part, when I see coupling or tripling of contractions, that's a big indicator to me that your uterus is really focusing on helping to rotate baby to find a better position, to find a smaller diameter to fit through the pelvis. Maybe they're asynclitic, maybe they're OP, which means that their back is facing your back. All of these things can make it harder for your baby to fit into the pelvis. That is often when we see that coupling and tripling of contractions. But to you, what that's gonna feel like is, oh my gosh, why are these contractions back to back to back? I'm getting no break, and then I'm getting a break, like everything feels really uneven, disjointed, and that's when we are gonna work as your labor team to help you find some different positions to help baby settle into a better position into the pelvis. But next, really 6 things that I'm going to talk about are often things that we are going to be experiencing as labor gets more intense, as we're hitting that transition mark, that 8, 9, 10 centimeters. Things are really moving and grooving, and baby is getting deep into our pelvis. The thing that can happen with contractions is we think about them mostly being on our belly, maybe wrapping around to our back, but we can even experience contraction discomfort and intensity down into our thighs. And that is because of how your baby is positioning and coming through the pelvis, right? All of these things are connected. So feeling pain in your thighs, intensity in your hips are not a sign that anything's wrong, but just something that maybe you weren't really expecting on experiencing or feeling, and often something that we feel as baby's getting lower and we're really starting to experience transition. With transition, the other thing that we can experience is shakes. Okay, if we get that burst of adrenaline that is actually helpful at the end of labor to help us make it through and encourages our baby to breathe on the way out, we often get kind of shaky too, and you cannot control them. A few things that we can do to kind of disrupt this pathway of the shaking. One is going to be to stick out your tongue and very gently bite down. It is going to interrupt that nervous system reaction. The other thing that we can do is get a nice big warm blanket, place that on your chest, put it over your head like you are Mother Mary herself. And the other thing that can be really helpful if you're lying down is using a pressure point on your foot. So in between your great toe and your second toe, right here, and putting a little bit of pressure is going to be helpful. We also can see them postpartum with that big burst of adrenaline. Again, a warm blanket and baby on your chest is gonna really help to bring down that nervous system reaction. We can also have shakes when we get an epidural. We don't 100% know why this is, but one thought is, okay, your brain is like, la 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 la, oh my God, I can't feel my lower half. I can't feel it. What on earth is happening? And immediately it goes Titanic, okay? You are Jack. You are in the water, you are holding on to that boat, to that door, and while there was room for you, you don't get on there. So we can't feel the lower half of our body because it's really cold. And so we're shaking to help bring up our body temperature, right? All of those tricks work really well, and I believe from personal experience that the pressure point on the foot works especially well for that type of shaking, for the post-epidural shakes. Speaking of epidurals, the other thing that can happen when we have an epidural is we have a loss of control over some of our sphincters, right? We have this beautiful baby pressing down on our lower GI tract. We have sphincters, right? Or like our butt, our anus, that are gonna be a little bit less controlled, right? Because we can't feel, we can't control them. And you may or may not have some toots. You may or may not pass a little bit of gas. as we're moving and grooving, as your baby's coming down, that you have absolutely zero control over. Guess what I'm gonna do? First, one, pretend like nothing happened. And then two, blame it on your support person, because in this room, you are a perfect angel goddess and you are not farting. No, 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 no. That was your support person, okay? And in reality, if they were the one to get you pregnant, then if we really look back and really analyze the whole situation, yeah, it was their fault. So I said what I said. But gas can be normal, and do not feel embarrassed. Do not feel embarrassed. Please note that I do not care, even if you fart right in my face, okay? All the bodily fluids that we've talked about so far, in the whole realm of nursing, things could be much weirder, grosser, funkier. It's no big deal. Speaking of though, right, that gas, that baby pressing down, another sensation that you're pretty likely to feel as you get close to fully dilated is really intense rectal pressure. You're gonna feel like your baby is trying to come out of your butt. And I promise you that they're not, but that's incredibly what it's going to feel like. If you have an epidural, you might not realize that any of these things are happening. The rectal pressure that you might feel like is the LaCroix of rectal pressure. Ideally, when we start pushing, you're feeling rectal pressure most intensely with the contraction, but kind of continuous in between as well. That's a really good indication that your baby is nice and low in your pelvis and ready for the pushing process to begin. As you start pushing and bearing down, you are going to feel like you're pooping, regardless of if you're pooping or not. From my last birth, as I was bearing down, I said, oh my gosh, I'm pooping. They said, no, you're not. With the next push, I said, oh my gosh, I'm pooping. It was silent because at that point I did poop, okay? But you know what? Still look all those coworkers in the eye, because it ain't no shame. Let me tell you a little story, right? If I were the creator of beings, would I have placed the vagina and the anus maybe a little bit further apart? Personally, yes. But they're close together for many reasons, and one of them is that your baby coming into this world through that area is going to help populate their gut with great bacteria that is going to help them do all the things that they need to do eventually, right? And so there is a reason for the placement. Another thing that I personally have witnessed a bunch in unmedicated births, and then I kind of put out feelers on Instagram and I was like, hey, do you find this to be true as well? A lot of birth workers responded, and people who have given birth unmedicated also responded and were like, yes, this is totally a thing. Grounding. You are laboring, doing your thing, and then all of a sudden you find yourself physically on the ground. And I have so many times had providers come in and be like, why are we on the ground? Like, do they want to be on the ground? Does she want to be on the ground? And I'm like, I don't really know, but this is what we're doing. You're physically getting close to the ground because the earth feels safe to us. And also when your baby comes out, you know that when you're close to the ground, they're not going to be falling or anything like that happen, because the ground, the earth is our mother, and it is safe to us. And also, just like from a physics perspective, safer to deliver your baby on the ground than standing up. Although people do that unmedicated as well. But yeah, if you find yourself on the ground, you're grounding for safety, and it is a normal phenomena that we see in birth. Kind of weird, kind of crazy, totally normal. The very last sensation, bodily sensation that I'm going to talk about that is normal in birth and actually really good, really positive, is the ring of fire. Really great thing, really bad name, and it is the sensation of your baby stretching vaginal opening as their head's coming through. When we experience that, it's very different from what we've been feeling before, and our natural inclination might be to yell, ah! Or also, oop, stop pushing. Both of which are going to slow down your pushing efforts and allow that tissue time to stretch. If we're screaming, our pelvic floor is tightening, that is going to slow the descent out of baby. Another thing that we can do when we experience this, instead of giving big, strong pushes, give little pushes and blow out like we're blowing out a candle, or pant like a puppy, to allow that tissue and that area time to stretch. If you've got an epidural, you may or may not feel this sensation, but your provider can help guide you in doing smaller pushes and easing out your baby's head to reduce your risk of significant tearing. Now, if you're curious as to what the ring of fire feels like, I'm gonna show you a little demonstration, and you can choose in your own time if this is something that you want to feel. But this is like very much what it feels like. You're gonna open your mouth as wide as you can, you're gonna put your fingers in, and you're gonna stretch. Okay, and you're gonna hold that for 20-30 seconds. So like, you feel that stretching sensation, that is what this is. And a stretch is a good thing because a stretch and a nice slow stretch is going to allow that tissue to find room for baby's head and to reduce the risk of significant tearing, which is always our goal. It's going to be great for you both in the short term and in the long term as far as your sexual health and your pelvic health. So those are all the funky bodily sensations that you might feel, weird, cool, and why you might feel them and what you can do about them. Maybe if it's helpful. Definitely let me know if you had any other weird but normal sensations in your labor and birth in the comments down below. And until next time, bye guys!